Hello everyone, welcome to Twilight. If you have anything to say related to the video or notice any issues, let us know in the comments. For now, enjoy the video. What if Bella became a vampire before Forks? Chicago 1918. Bella POV. He was dying and there was nothing I could do about it. I watched as one by one my whole family was taken by the horror that was influenza. First my mother, then my father, then both my in-laws. I know I was sitting at another bedside watching my husband fight for his life. It just wasn't fair. Why should he have to die? He was only 17, we hadn't even had enough time together, and no, he was being ripped from my grasp after only 3 months of marriage. I placed my head in my hands and let my memories overtake me to sweep me away from the sickness and sadness and into happier times. Flashback. Chicago 1917. I shivered as the cold wind blew against me. I was walking to the park trying to get some peace and quiet and not have to hear any more about that despicable war that was ravishing the world at that moment. Just then I heard my name being called. I turned around and saw Edward Mason running up behind me. I gave him my best glare as I stopped in my tracks and waited for him. What do you want, Edward? I was seething, remembering my conversation with him only hours before where he had told me he wanted to go off to fight in that horrible war. Bella, you can't seriously be mad at me, can you? Every boy my age wants to go off and fight for their country. I felt tears start to prickle at the edge of my eyes as I looked up into the mossy green of his, the eyes I loved so much. But what would I do if you die, Edward? And anyway, you're too young to fight, you're not even 17 yet. He looked at me smugly. I could always lie about my age. That was it. That was what really set me off. Wanting to fight was one thing, but to lie about his age so he could go before he should, to leave me even faster than he had to. I slapped him across the face as tears were now pouring down my face. I quickly ran past him and to my house as fast as I could. I could hear him right behind me. I didn't stop until I was at my front door, which I threw open and rushed up the stairs and into my room. I threw myself on my bed and buried my face in my pillow, trying to muffle the sobs that rocked my body. I heard him enter my room and sit on my bed. I felt his gentle hand on the small of my back, and I heard the soft shoushing sounds he was making. I turned over to look at him with my red-rimmed eyes. Don't leave me, Edward, please. I can't live without you. Please, you're only 16. Don't make me lose you until I have to. He pulled me into his arms, and I placed my face against his warm chest. My Bella, my sweet Bella, don't cry. I'm sorry, so sorry. Please forgive me, for I love you, my Bella. I quickly pulled away from him and stared into his eyes, the eyes I had known since my birth. You what? I could barely say the words back, use of the constriction in my heart. I love you, Bella, he said once again. I then propped to throw myself into his arms. Oh, Edward Manson, I love you more than words could say. He slowly pulled away from me and gently kissed my forehead. I will love you forever, my dear Bella, he whispered. I slowly came out of my memory. I gave a short bitter laugh. Well, I guess he will never have to go to war now, will he? For here he lay fighting for his life, not yet 18. We had been engaged not 3 months after his confession of love and married 3 months ago on my 16th birthday. The world seemed so mean to take him away from me so soon as we came together to share our life. Just then Dr. Cullen came into the room. I loved up into the face of the kind doctor. Mrs. Mawson, I'm sorry to inform you that it looks like your husband won't make it through the night. I couldn't take it. The doctor was never wrong. He seemed to always know when someone was going to die. I leaned over and placed a kiss on Edward's forehead. I love you, my Edward, the first whispered. As my heart splintered into 1,000 pieces, I got up and walked from the hospital, tears pouring down my cheeks. I couldn't be there when he took his last breath. I just couldn't bear to see his still body without his heart beating. Edward POV. I woke up after 3 days of excruciating pain. I opened my eyes to see Dr. Cullen looking at me. What happened? He went on to tell me that I had been turned into a vampire and that I would live for all eternity. He explained to me about his vegetarian diet, as he called it. You throw this, all I could think about was that I would never see my Bella again, that she would die and I wouldn't be there waiting for her on the other side. If I could have cried at that moment, I would have. Bella POV. A few months later, I went to his grave the day I turned 17. As I sat on the ground and traced the letters of his name with my fingers, I was pulled back to the day he proposed to me, the best day of my life aside from my wedding day. Flashback. I was sitting on my porch swing looking up at the stars in the clear night sky when I heard the swing move and felt someone sit down beside me. I smiled when I felt a warm hand envelope my own. I would know the feel of that skin anywhere. Hello, Edward, the first turned to Look into his eyes, I could see that something was bothering him. What is it? I brought my hand up and gently stroked his cheek. Bella, will you marry me? He asked, sliding from the swing and down onto one knee. I looked at him with awe. Well, he pulled a box out of his pocket, flipping the lid up. I saw the most amazing ring ever. It was so pretty, with a diamond surrounded by a bunch of little sapphires. I had to let out a small smile, for everyone knew that blue was his favorite color. Oh yes, Edward I will marry you. I slid down onto my knees next to him as he took my hand with his own and slipped the ring onto it. I stared at the ring, the promise that he was making. I looked up into his shining eyes and smiled. He bent his head towards me and placed his lips against mine. He kissed me for the first time that night as he made that first promise to me. Tears were now splashing down onto the grass around me, and as I looked around at the dusky graveyard, I noticed that someone else was there, an older woman. She came walking towards me. When she got closer to me, I noticed the red glint of her eyes. I started to back away, but she was too fast for me. The next thing I know, all I could feel was the most horrific pain of life. When the pain started to fade, I opened my eyes and saw the same woman. She explained to me what she had done. All I could think was, no, I'll never make it to see my Edward. I couldn't stand the smell of human blood, never could when I was human either, so I left my crater and wandered around the country using animal blood to sustain me and forever mourning that I would never die and be reunited with Edward. Bella POV. It had been nearly 90 years since I was changed, and through that time I had found out that I could block my mind as though I had a shield. Today I was starting a new school in Forks, Washington. I had found it on the internet, and it seemed like an okay place to settle down. It had a minimum amount of sun. I was living in a small apartment. I didn't really have that much money back use, though I was really over 100 years old. I only looked 17, and it was hard to get into a college. I did have a degree in psychology, but who would believe that someone as young as me would have a degree? So it was hard to find work. The one indulgence I allowed myself was my car. I loved my little car. I was driving to the school for the first day of classes. Oh yeah, here we go with high school one more time, joy. As my hands were on the steering wheel, I looked at my wedding ring. I was a bit tarnished with age, but it could still pass for almost new. People would just comment that it was nice to see teenagers appreciating vintage jewelry. I know that I properly shouldn't be wearing it on my ring finger, but I just couldn't bring myself to take the rings off. They were all I had left of Edward. And even though my human memories were faded, Edward was the one thing I would never forget. I couldn't forget. For he was my heart, my soul. I pulled into the school parking lot, shaking my head at the rundown building that made up the school, wondering when this town would get with the ages. I had went to a better looking school when I was human, and that was in the early 1900s, for heaven's sakes. I looked around the parking lot. I noticed that there was a spot next to a shiny silver Volvo, and something compelled me to park next to it. I opened my door and swung out of the car, grabbing my backpack from the back seat. I hurried into the office. The office was tiny. There was a woman sitting behind a desk going through some papers. "Excuse me," I said. She looked up at me, a smile plastered across her face. "How may I help you, dear?" "Yes, I'm Isabella Mason. I'm new, and I need to pick up my schedule, please." Of course, she shuffled through some papers before handing me a few pages of paper. "There you go, dear. Just have your teacher sign this piece of paper, please." Of course, I took the papers from her and hurried out of the building. I noticed that the first class I had was English. I hurried into the room and up to the teacher. After he signed my paper, I quickly took a seat. I hated to be the center of attention. I heard some of the boys whispering behind me. One said I was smoking hot, while the other said he wouldn't mind having a piece of me. I glared at the boys and slid down in my seat. I truly hated it when boys talked about me, and I really hated their impure thoughts towards me. For I would only ever belong to one man, even if he was dead, and I was immoral. Only one man had ever been allowed to touch me, kiss me, hold me, and that was Edward I. Was his body, mind, and soul for all eternity, literally. The rest of the morning seemed to pass quickly, and soon it was time for lunch. As I walked into the cafeteria, I caught the scent of other vampires. I quickly scanned the room and saw 5 people sitting together, separate from the rest of the people. I noticed a beautiful blonde, a short girl with black hair, a blonde boy, and a very burly man who, if I wasn't a vampire, would properly have scared me. That's when my eyes landed on him and I froze. It couldn't be. No, it wasn't possible. He was dead. It just had to be someone else. The next thing I know, he was looking at me, shock on his face, and I was walking towards their table trying to breath, which was ironic. Becuse, I really didn't need to breath. Edward POV. That morning as I was getting dressed, Alice burst into my room. Luckily, I was already dressed. But still, Alice, don't you know how to knock? I asked the little black-haired pixie in front of me. Edward guessed what she asked, bouncing up and down. I humored her even though I already know what she was going to say. What, Alice? There's a new girl coming to the school today and I think she might be a vampire. That's nice, Alice, and no. For I could hear the matchmaking going on inside her head. She pouted and stalked out of my room. After she left, I went over to my dresser and took out my wedding ring from the top drawer. I never wore it, for no one in my family knew about Bella well except for Carlisle, but he would know since she never left my side when I was sick. Everyone always wondered why I wouldn't date anyone. Yes, I had had plenty of offers, but no one would ever live up to my perfectly imperfect Bella. For she was my love, my soul, and even if she was dead, my heart would always be hers. Becuse, I had promised her to love her forever, and I intend to keep that promise even if she was not there to feel my love. I hurried down the stairs and into the living room, my backpack slung over my shoulder. Come on, you guys, I said. We all met out at my car and piled in. The morning was going great, well, that is, except for Alice, who kept bouncing up and down in her seat wanting to meet the new girl and upset Becuse. She wasn't in any of her morning classes. By lunchtime, Alice was really starting to get on my nerves. We were sitting there staring at the food that we, of course, would never eat. When I caught the scent of vampire, I looked up and my eyes widened. No, it couldn't be. She was dead. I froze. She was looking right into my eyes. It wasn't possible. She started walk towards our table. Could it be true? Could it be my Bella? As I stared at the girl that looked so much like my lost love, I could hear all my siblings' thoughts being shouted in my head. Jasper wanted to know why I was scared. Emmett thought I was playing a joke. Rosalie could really care less. She was just trying to evaluate the new girl's prettiness, and Alice was thinking that things couldn't be going better. The only thing I could do was stare at the angel coming towards me, wondering, hoping, and praying that it was my Bella. Bella POV. I locked eyes with the blonde vampire and tried to breathe as I walked towards their table, trying not to get my hopes up. It couldn't be my Edward. No, it wasn't possible. I tore my eyes away from his. I looked straight ahead, trying not to look into those golden eyes, not wanting to be hopeful. I walked up to their table, my eyes trained on the little black-haired girl sitting beside him. Trying to act as calm as possible so they didn't think I was a complete psycho, I walked up to them. Speaking only to the girl. May I sit here, please? I asked in my most polite voice, trying not to betray the butterflies that were hovering in the pit of my stomach. She looked up at me, a smile spread across her face. Of course, sit. She was practically jumping up and down in her seat. I took a seat and she just kept talking. I kept my eyes away from the blonde man and tried to focus on the hyper vampire in front of me. I mean, really, I had never saw anyone so hyper in my life. I'm Alice, and this is my sister, Rosalie. She pointed to the pretty blonde. I turned to her and gave her a small smile, which she returned. And this is my husband, Jasper. She gave a small giggle when she said this. Nice to meet you, I muttered to the man sitting beside Alice. He just nodded his head in my direction. And that over there is Emmett. She pointed to the burly man sitting next to Rosalie. I looked at him, and he was giving me this really sloppy grin. Hi, I whispered, still a bit intimidated by this man. Nice to meet you, he said to me. Then she turned to the last person sitting at the table. The one that I didn't want to look at. And this is my brother Edward. When she spoke that name, my world started to come crashing down, and my hand went to my wedding ring. I nervously started to twirl it on my finger. I still couldn't look at him. Was it too much of a coincidence, or could it be true? That's when she asked me what my name was. I looked at her, not really connecting what she had asked me, but guessing and answering her question. Bella Mason, I said. I heard a gasp, and then heard rather than saw heads swiveling back and forth between me and Edward. That's when I know it must be true. Becuse, if my name could get that much reaction out of them, there had to be something to what I was thinking. My head snapped up and I stared into the eyes of Edward, my beautiful Edward. The only word I heard him utter was Bella before I launched myself across to him and to his side. If I could cry, I think tears would be pouring down my face. Oh, Edward, is it really you? I dry sobbed as I clutched the front of his shirt with my tiny fist. He wrapped his arms around me, and I could feel 4 curious pairs of eyes on us, and the eyes of the whole cafeteria on us also, but all I could feel was elation of being in the arms of my Edward once again. He gently rocked me back and forth, crooning softly in that voice that always soothed me, but now seemed to have something extra to it. Oh, my Bella was all I could hear as he rocked me back and forth. He got up from the table, and I could feel him carrying me from the room where he was taking me. I didn't know nor did I care, for wherever Edward went I would go. I heard 4 sets of feet following us out of the room. Edward POV. As she walked across the cafeteria towards us, I couldn't take my eyes off of her. It couldn't be my Bella, no, it just couldn't. Then she abruptly tore her eyes away from me and trained them straight ahead. She kept walking to our table, though looking at Alice this time, I noticed. Soon she was at our table and asking Alice if she could sit with us. Alice, in her usual overjoyous way, was bouncing up and down at the opportunity, and I think she would have grabbed the poor girl and pulled her into a seat if she hadn't asked first. Then Alice went on to introduce the family to the girl. If I was the poor thing, I would be so bewildered. I noticed that she wouldn't look at me, that she was looking anywhere but at me, and I wondered what that was about. I couldn't keep my eyes off of her and Jasper, and Rosalie seemed to notice. Jasper was wondering why I was sending him confused feeling, and Rosalie was wondering why I was staring at the girl when I never stared at any girl. Emmett didn't realize anything was out of the ordinary, and Alice was too busy talking. Alice introduced her to everyone. She had a smile and a polite word for everyone, even Emmett, who I could tell intimidated her. That is when I realized that I couldn't read her mind. I found it weird, but just shook it off, not able to take my eyes off of her. Finally, Alice got around to introducing me. I was ready with my best smile, but when Alice said my name, she seemed to have a strange reaction, and I noticed her hand started to twirl a ring around her finger. This was just getting odder by the minuet. That's when Alice asked her name, and I think without thinking she answered. When the name Bella Mason came out of her mouth, I gasped, and I felt all my siblings' heads whip towards me. I head came up as she looked into my eyes, and hers seemed to light form the inside. That is when I said the only word I could think of, Bella. She launched herself into my arms before I could even blink, and I could feel a rush of happiness and love as I realized that I once again had my Bella in my arms. "Oh, Edward, is it really you?" I heard her sob into the front of my shirt as she clung to me. I wrapped my arms around her, feelings of elation rushing through me. I could feel all my siblings' confession as their thoughts swirled in my head, and the one thing they all wanted to know was who this girl was that had thrown herself in my arms, that held my last name. But I couldn't deal with them right now as I gently rocked my Bella back and forth, gently saying her name over and over, knowing I would never get tired of that name on my lips. I could feel the eyes of everyone on us, so I stood up out of my seat and carried Bella out of there, my siblings following closely behind, hoping for some answers. Bella POV. I was cradled in his arms as he carried me out of the school cafeteria amid many comments from our schoolmates. I could hear his family following behind us and buried myself deeper into his chest. I felt his arms tighten around me. When we stopped, I looked up and noticed we had stopped at the silver Volvo that I had noticed this morning. He pulled some keys out of his pocket while trying to juggle me in his arms. I had to laugh a little at this. As he opened the door to put me in, I finally had to say something. There was no way I was going to leave my car in the school parking lot. "Edward, what about my car?" He looked at me. "Which one's yours?" I pointed to the light blue Volvo sitting next to his. When he saw my car, he cracked a slight smile. "Give me the keys, Bella. I'll have Rosalie drive it to my house." As he said this, he leaned closer until I could feel his cold breath on my ear. "I don't want to let you out of my sight for a minuet, my sweet Bella," he whispered in my ear. At his words, I felt an electric current run up my spine. I dug the keys out of my pants pocket and handed them to him. He threw them to Rosalie and then opened the door to his car and slid me across to the passenger side, sliding into the driver's seat. I watched as the rest of his family piled into my car, and then he started the engine and we were off. It only took us 5 minuets to pull into a long and winding dirt driveway, Rosalie right behind us. My mouth dropped open at the sight of the house in front of me. It wasn't like I hadn't grown up with money, for I had, and it is true that Edward's family had always had more than my own, but I hadn't had that kind of money in decades, and it was really overwhelming. Edward parked in front of the house and jumped out to open my door for me. "Always the gentleman," I murmured to myself, shaking my head at how much he could still act like the date was still 1918, and we were coming home from one of our many dates. As he pulled me from the car, my mind started to wander, and I didn't notice him taking my hand and pulling me up the front steps to his house, closely followed by his siblings. Flashback, Chicago 1918. I smiled as I watched Edward drive his father's new car. He was so proud that his father had allowed him to drive the car to take me out to the Appleton party. Not that I really wanted to go to the party, for they aren't really my thing, but Ellie Appleton was one of the richest girls in the city, and you should never offend her. It was like an unwritten law. Her daddy was the judge, and you never wanted to get on the bad side of the Appleton. But there was one thing I had that Ellie didn't, and that was Edward, and it truly miffed her. I smiled over at Edward as he pulled into my driveway, which was totally unnecessary for I lived next door to him and could have walked home, but whatever. He quickly hopped out of the car and ran around to my side, opening my door for me. He took my hand and helped me out of the car and walked me to my door. He gently brushed his lips on mine when he left me at my door. "Have a good night, my Bella," he smiled at me as he stroked my cheek and I leaned into his soft touch. I watched him go back to his car and drive next door, waving to me the whole time, and I couldn't help but sigh and think how perfect my life was. Present day. "Bella, are you okay, Bella?" I heard someone call to me. I quickly shook the memory out of my mind and focused on the worried face of Edward in front of me. "I'm fine, just going back in my memory." I smiled at him as he took my hand and opened the front door. The rest of his family already inside. It seems that while I was off in dreamland, they had went inside. I guessed the inside of the house was even more spacious and grand than the outside of the house. Just then a woman with soft caramel hair walked into the room. She smiled when she saw us and came up to Edward. "Edward dear, who is this?" she asked, smiling at me in a way I have been smiled at since my own mother and Edward's mother used to smile at me. I could feel the love radiating off of this woman. Just then Alice spoke. "We would all like to know who she is." "One minuet. She is asking if she can sit with us," and avoiding looking at Edward. The next thing I know, she is telling us her name is Bella Mason, and she is launching herself in Edward's arms, and he is soothing her and carrying her out of the school. The next thing I knew, Edward was speaking. Edward POV. "After I carried her out of the school, I took her immediately to my car, my pulse raising as I was opening the door to put her into the car. She had suddenly spoken up, not wanting to leave her own car behind. I smiled when I noticed that she had the same type of car that I did. I had her give me her keys, which I throw to Rosalie, and then got into my own car and started TP drive. I could hear the questions that my siblings wanted to ask, especially Alice, but I knew no was not the time to discuss this. As we were driving up the driveway, I noticed that she seemed to be overwhelmed by the size and grandeur of the house, which hurt Beckus. It made me realize that she properly hadn't had much money in the last 90 years. As I opened her car door for her, I could see the amusement wash across her face. As we were walking up the steps, she seemed to blank out on me. "Edward, what's wrong with her?" Alice asked from behind me. "I'm not sure. Go on ahead," said she, nodded and slipped past me. The rest following, Rosalie throwing me Bella's keys as she passed. I started to call Bella's name and ask if she was okay. She seemed to snap out of it at that point. She told me she was just going down memory lane. When Esme's came to meet us at the door, I noticed that Bella seemed to relax in her presence, and for that I was grateful. When Esme and Alice both demanded to know what was going on, I looked them both square in the face and squeezed Bella's hand. "Is Dad here yet?" I asked, looking around. Just then he appeared at the top of the stairs. "I'm here, Edward. What's going on?" he questioned. That's when he noticed Bella at my side and stopped dead in his tracks. "Can we all just sit down on the couch and talk about what's going on?" I asked. I led Bella over to one of the oversized sofas and pulled her onto my lap, the rest of the family surrounding us. I looked around at all their expecting faces and gave Bella's waist a slight squeeze. I went into the story of me and Bella, of our childhood, of our courtship, and our brief marriage leading up to the deaths that were inflicted by the influenza. When I got to the part about Carlisle changing me, everyone turned to stare at him. I could tell that they were all a little upset that they had never told them about my lost love. "You guys, it's not his fault. He knew how difficult the memory of Isabella was for me, and he didn't want to cause me more pain." Everyone seemed to calm down, and then they turned their attention to Bella. "Bella, where do you live?" Esme asked in her motherly way. "Oh, I live in a little apartment I found," she said, quickly, not wanting to make a big fuss, I could tell. "Oh no, you must move in here. You can move into Edward's bedroom, and it will be just perfect," I heard her say, and I had to smile. Mother Cullen strikes again. Oh no, I couldn't impose. Bella was starting to look distressed. "Bella, listen to me. This is my home. This is my family. You are my family, and not just me, but everyone wants you here." Smiled at her encouragingly. I knew everyone wanted her. Beckus, I could hear the thoughts. They all thought she would make the perfect addition to the family. Esme and Carlisle. Beckus, they wanted to see me happy. Emmett Beckus, he wanted somebody else. He could prank Rosalie and Alice to have someone else to shop with, and Jasper, well, he just liked her, and of course I wanted her here. Beckus, I couldn't live without her. "If that's what you want, then I guess so. Okay, Edward, I'll move in with you guys." Alice was now jumping up and down, planning a shopping spree in her head and going crazy. I was just happy, and Esme was planning the layout of our room, the way it should look and be to make Bella the most comfortable. I smiled as Bella snuggled closer to me. Bella POV. When they said they wanted me to live with them, I panicked. That was too much. I don't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't that. But when I saw the longing in Edward's eyes, there was no way I could say no, so I said yes, although hesitantly, and snuggled into Edward, watching Alice jump up and down knowing I was going to be in for some big shopping. I had to stifle a groan, but beside that I felt at home for the first time in 90 years, and I wondered how I had got so lucky. The love of my life back and a new family. This was definitely a day to remember. Bella POV. Okay, so Alice was literally bouncing off the walls, waving paint colors in front of my face. Which do you like better, Bella, pink or blue? Should it be this shade or that? I swear I was about to strangle that little pixie. I was having horrid flashbacks from when I was trying to plan my wedding to Edward, and I couldn't help but cringe. Chicago 1918. Bella, would you come down here for a minuet? I heard my mother call up the stairs. I sat up in my bed and put down my ragged copy of Wuthering Heights. Not really wanting to know what my mother wanted since my engagement to Edward 2 weeks ago, she had been in full wedding mode. Yesterday, she wanted to know what color bridesmaids' dresses I wanted, and after going through colors for an hour, she still picked the one she wanted. And that is how I ended up with peach bridesmaids' dresses, instead of the light blue I wanted the day before that it was flowers, and instead of the simple daisies I wanted, I ended up with roses. I quickly went down the stairs, wanting to get this over with as soon as possible. What is it, Mother? I asked when I found her in the parlor. Oh dear, what kind of cake should we have? I sighed. I knew it was no use telling her I wanted a chocolate cake, since I knew I would end up with a butternut cake with strawberry frosting. Becuse, she would think that was so much more romantic. So I just let her prattle on as I daydreamed about Edward. Present day. I just sighed and told her that I didn't care. I knew it wouldn't matter anyway. Becuse, I could see too much of my mother in her. I was growing to love Alice, but her bouncy, always happy attitude was sometimes quite annoying. This afternoon, she had dragged me to my apartment, leaving an unhappy Edward behind, and when she saw my tiny apartment and the minuscule amount of clothes that I had, she about had a heart attack. She was horrified. She had quickly thrown my clothes in a bag and rushed me back to her house. Rushing through the door, she was calling out to Rose before the door could even close. Oh my God, Rose, you have got to get down here, she shouted up the stairs. Rosalie came running down the stairs looking panicked. What is it, Alice? What's wrong? This, she grabbed my bag and poured the contents onto the floor in a multicolored heap. The funny thing was that Rose looked just as horrified at the lack of clothes I had. They both grabbed me and I was dragged into a room which I assumed was Alice's. Becuse, she quickly went to the closet and started to riffle through it, tossing clothes everywhere until she came up with a small pile of clothes. She held them out to me. Here, take these, you can have them, and we are going shopping like right now. Alice and Rose both dragged me out to Rosalie's car and practically shoved me into the back seat. I swear to God they were kidnapping me. Becuse, believe me, shopping was a form of torture to me. Stupid Edward leaving me alone with his sisters. Just then I saw Emmett smiling us, and I could tell he really wanted to laugh. I just stuck my tongue out at him. Next thing I knew, we were speeding down the highway to God only news were. Edward POV. After Bella agreed to move in Alice and taken her back to her apartment, I went out hunting with Japer and Emmett. When I got home, I noticed that all 3 girls were gone. I noticed that Emmett was leaning against the kitchen door, a smirk across his face. What is it? I warily asked him. You're going to have one pissed off wife on your hands later, dude. He smiled at me and I started to panic, trying to remember what I could have forgotten to make her mad. What's wrong? I asked, trying to act like I wasn't panicking. Luckily it was Emmett and not Jasper I was talking to. My wife and Alice dragged her off to go shopping. I should properly say they kidnapped her. Shit, I said. I knew she wasn't going to be happy. She hated shopping. Los Angeles. Bella POV. The next thing I knew, we were in California and I was being dragged into a high-priced store which screamed I have to be a millionaire or want to go into serious debt if I want to shop here. They started to hold up clothes for me and then carry them until they found a dressing room. They shoved me into one of the dressing rooms and started to throw clothes at me as fast as I could change. I couldn't believe the price. The scanner rang up when Alice and Rose decied that I had enough clothes I could have feed a third world country for that amount. Though there was one thing I had bought for myself, one thing that I hoped Edward would appreciate. I giggled when I thought about his face when he saw me in it. Forks. When we got home, I looked at all the bags piled in the back of the car and called Edward. There was no way I was carrying all of this. He was at my side in an instant. He took my bags and carried them up to our room while I thought about what the night would bring to once again be in Edward's arms. It sent a shiver up my spine. Bella POV. When I walked into the bedroom, I looked around. I noticed that there was a giant bed in the center. I walked over to a door. I opened it and found a giant walk-in closet. I opened it and gasped. I hadn't realized how many clothes we had actually bought that day. I walked across the room to a door opposite and opened it to find a bathroom with a giant tub and a shower and a really beautiful vanity. Edward was downstairs, so I went into the closet and took down the box I had gotten that day at some store that was called Victoria's Secret. I quickly opened it and took out the silky blue nightgown I had purchased, hoping Edward would like it. As I slipped it over my head, I flashed back to a night similar to this. Chicago 1918. I sat at the vanity across the room from the bed, brushing my hair out and trying to lose that nervous feeling in the pit of my stomach. I keep casting nervous glances at the bed as I laid the brush down on the vanity, and I sat down on the bed, my hands running up and down my new silk nightgown. I could feel slight tremors run through my body. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I felt like someone was watching me. I looked up and my gaze collided with Edward's. He was standing in our doorway in his robe, looking at me with his green eyes that I just wanted to melt into. Before I knew it, he was beside me and I was in his arms. His lips were pressed against mine and I felt my body melt into his. My arms were around his neck and his hands were roving over my body, and that's when I started to cry. Tears gently started to glide down my face and land on Edward. He gently pulled back and looked into my eyes. "Bella baby, what's wrong?" he asked, concern flashing within his eyes. I don't know, I'm just scared, oh Edward." I cried as he looked me in my eyes. Brown meeting green, he gently took me into his arms and laid us back onto the bed. He held me to him tenderly and kissed my lips gently. "I love you, Bella, my sweet, lovely Bella. It's okay, just quit down and rest. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." He whispered, his warm breath blowing against my ear. I looked into his loving and trusting eyes and realized that nothing bad could happen to me while I was in his arms. I kissed him and started to untie his robe. Soon I had it discarded, and my hair was in disarray from him running his fingers through it. The next thing I knew, he was lifting my nightgown over my head, and I lay in front of him completely naked. I tried not to blush, but I could feel the blood heat my cheeks. "Beautiful," he murmured, letting his eyes rove over my naked body. He started to kiss down my body, and I arched into his kisses, feeling all the new sensations running through my body. I felt him against me and stiffened. He pulled his head up and gently and reassuringly kissed me, planting light kisses all over my face. Soon he was laying over top of me, looking down into my eyes. "Are you ready?" I nodded and felt him start to enter me. I felt the tightness, and then I felt him stop. "This is going to hurt a bit." He kissed me and then procked to push farther into me. I felt pain rip through my body and I stiffened, trying to stifle a sob, the tears leaking out of the corner of my eyes. He stopped and held still, kissing each tear from cheek. I felt my body adjust around him and I felt him start to move again. The pain wasn't completely gone, but now it was really dull and I could feel other things swirl within me. I felt my body arch to meet his, and I felt my body get wound tighter and tighter until I felt like I was going to explode. Then he thrust into me once more and I felt my world shatter, and I felt him shudder and still over me. We were both gasping for breath as he kissed me one last time. Present day. I felt like that naive girl once again. It had been 90 years since I've been seen naked by anyone but myself. I quickly crawled into bed. That's when I felt someone's eyes on me. I looked over and smiled at Edward in the doorway. I stood up out of the bed and quickly flung my nightgown over my head, standing there naked in front of him. He stared stunned at what was in front of me. "Are you going to join me?" I asked, wiggling my hips at him. He was at my side in a minuet. Somehow he had managed to shed all of his clothes in the process, and we both stood in front of each other, looking at each other for the first time in 90 years. He grabbed me and crushed his lips to mine, and then he tossed me onto the bed, coming after me. He was over top of me, kissing me in the most demanding ways. It sent a thrill through my whole body as I clung to and he entered me. We started a hard and fast rhythm, both panting with need and want. It felt like our bodies had never been separated. It felt like we had always been together. He pumped into me harder as we both neared our peak, and then we both screamed out each other's names at the same time. He collapsed on top of me and I hugged him to me, not wanting to let him go. He looked at me and then kissed me, but more gently this time. "I love you, my Bella. And I love you, my Edward." We spent the rest of the night in each other's arms. just enjoying the feel of each other and the love that poured from both of us. Edward POV. When I walked into that bedroom, I did not expect my wife to stand up and take her nightgown off and throw it over her head. I was shocked, but then she wiggled those delectable hips at me, and I was at her side in a second, kissing her with all the pent-up emotions that I had had for the last 90 years. I don't know what possessed me, but I literally threw her on the bed. I took her faster and harder than I ever had in my life. I think it was seeing her again, the desperation of not wanting to lose her again. I'm not sure. When she hugged me to her, I could feel the love pour from her. I just laid there the rest of the night, glad to have this girl back in my arms, to be able to hold her like this once again. My life was now complete. Bella POV. As the morning light poured through the windows, I buried my head deeper into Edward's chest. We had been laying there for a while, not saying anything, just being in each other's arms. Edward looked at me as I snuggled closer to him. Time for school, I heard Esme call up the stairs. I jumped out of bed, dragging a laughing Edward with me. I tossed some clothes at him that I had yanked off the rack and quickly changed into a simple outfit before Alice could burst in and demand to know what I was wearing. I grabbed Edward's hand and pulled him down the stairs. We were met by the rest of the Cullens, and we all packed into the Volvo. Alice ended up having to sit on Jasper's lap, but I really don't think she minded much. I saw her wiggle suggestively in his lap and start to giggle. As I walked through the school that morning with my new family, I noticed that I was getting more attention than ever before. Sure, I had been stared at the first day, and I knew a whole bunch of the boys lusted after me, but now that I was with Edward, the first seemed to be in the spotlight even more. For I had bagged the elusive Callan, or so I heard one girl whisper to her friend in the hall on the way to class. I tried to hide my smile as I remembered when other girls said the same thing 90 years ago. Chicago 1918. Bella POV. I was walking down the street on my way to school holding Edward's hand when I saw Anna Crimson came walking past us, talking in a semi-whisper to her best friend Sylvia Thompson. They shoved past us, and as I started to lose my balance, Edward reached out and caught me around the waist. I collided with his chest, and I could feel my face burn. He just smiled down at me. Then I heard Anna, "I bet she's sleeping with him. I bet that's the only reason he's with her." I felt tears prickle my eyes and bile burn my throat. Becuse, if Anna was telling people this, I was through. Even though it wasn't true, a girl's reputation could be ruined in a moment, and that was the worst accusation that could be made against me. Edward heard the comment also, and he could see the tears welling in my eyes. That is when he said the most unexpected thing. He quickly shouted out so the whole street could hear, "Just Becuse, you try to get into every guy's bed in the city and we're mad when I refuse to allow you, and mine doesn't give you the right to say things about other people, innocent people. Becuse, believe me, Anna, you're the only one that needs to sleep with a guy to get them to go out with you." Anna and Sylvia both froze in the middle of the street and turned to look at us. Sylvia wore a disgusted look which she pointed towards Anna, and Anna was just horrified. She just sent fiery glares our way. The rest of the people on the street just gasped at what they had just heard, and I just grabbed Edward's hand and pulled him away past the two girls, a mixture of horrified and elated running through me. For I had never heard Edward speak to anyone like that in my life. Well, believe me, Anna was sent off to live with a far-off Aunt the Minuet. Her parents got wind of what happened, and no girl ever messed with me again. Sure, they sent me coveted glances whenever Edward would take my hand, but they knew not to call me names, for Edward was mine, and he wasn't afraid to protect me. Present day. Bella POV. Just as I was coming out of my memory, I had someone utter the word slut at me. I cringed but had to smile. Becuse, I knew that no matter what, Edward would always be mine. Just then I felt Edward slip his hand into mine. I knew he had heard the comment, and I felt him squeeze my hand, and I looked up to smile at him, assuring him that I was okay. Edward POV. As I was walking down the hall, I could hear all the girls gossiping about Bella. I was seething, my temper starting to rise, especially when I heard someone call her a slut. I quickly walked up to her and slipped my hand into hers. When I saw her smile up at me, I knew everything would be okay, but I vowed to make sure no one ever said anything bad about her again. Bella POV. Oh my god, I hated that Mike Newton. He was such an ass. Oh baby, you know you want me. Oh gag me, that is the most repulsive thing I had ever heard. I really hated having Jim with him. Becuse, he would always stare at my ass. I wish I could slap him, but then I would probably break his jaw, and that would expose us. I quickly went into biology and sat down next to Edward, placing my hand in his, trying to sit as close to him as possible. I was practically sitting on his lap. He looked over at me, curiosity shining from his eyes, and I whispered, "Mike." He nodded his head and sent a glare Mike's way. I watched as he seemed to slip within his own mind. Edward POV. When Bella came running into the room and quickly grabbed my hand after she sat down, I was worried what had her so jumpy. She kept moving closer and closer to me. At one point, she was practically in my lap. I looked over at her. That's when she whispered the one word, Mike. I shot a look at the offending boy. I could hear his dirty thoughts as he leered at her. He was fantasizing about having her in his bed, the sick bastard. If he ever laid a hand on my precious Bella, I would kill him. Vito Yuri be damned. This sent me into the past, and the night I realized I would give my life for my Bella. Chicago 1918. Edward POV. I was in school when I noticed Bella walking down the halls faster than normal. She had a harassed look on her face when I wasn't used to seeing there. She was only 14 at the time. She wouldn't be 15 for a few more months, and though I felt a pull towards her, I didn't feel it was right to take advantage of our friendship that way. I quickly followed her to see where she was going. I watched her run past some boys, and I noticed the look they gave her. I noticed how she ducked her head as she passed, a single tear leaking out of the side of her eye. I didn't want to leave her, but I had to get to class, but I vowed to keep an eye on the boys. It was after school, and I was walking home from school. I hadn't seen Bella after school, and I figured maybe her father had picked her up. I was walking past a barely-used alleyway when I heard voices. I stopped in the shadows so I could hear what was going on. "Oh, come on, you know you want it. Oh, stop being such a tease," I heard another one say. I heard a girl sob, and I froze. My feet were stuck to the pavement. I heard cloth tear, and I was in action. I ran as fast as I could around the corner and saw a scene that truly horrified me. Standing in the alley were 3 boys surrounding a crying Bella. The shoulder of her dress ripped off. That's when the third boy spoke. "Oh, are you going to act innocent, Mississippi Swan?" He jeered at her. I could feel my blood boil. I quickly snuck up behind them. Bella, so upset she didn't see me. She was pleading with her tormentors. I heard her, and it solidified my resolve more. "Please, I don't know what you're talking about. Please let me go," she sobbed. I tapped the nearest boy, and he turned around to see who it was. I sent my fist flying into his face. When the other 2 turned to see what the commotion was, I quickly sent punches flying at them too. They both went down as I shook my sore hand out. I sent kicks to all 3 of them. I think I broke multiple bones in all their bodies. I left their sorry bodies there. If they died, I wouldn't feel remorse. I gathered Bella into my arms where she was shivering against the brick wall. I quickly pulled up her ripped dress as she sobbed into my shirt front. I vowed to myself and her to never let anything or anyone ever hurt her again. I buried my face in her sweet-smelling hair and rocked her back and forth in my arms, never wanting to let her go, to protect her forever. Present day. Edward POV. If he put one grimy finger on my Bella, I would let Jasper have him. I smiled down at Bella and kissed her forehead before I looked back at the teacher and did work that I had done 1,000 times before. Bella POV. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Emmett was standing in front of me holding out a water gun. "No way. I am not having a water gun fight with you, Emmett." He started to pout. No, I walked away from him, still standing on the front lawn. When I went into the kitchen, I found Rosalie sitting at the corner flipping through a magazine. "Rosalie, your husband wants me to have a water gun fight with." "Seriously, I worry about him sometimes." She smiled at me. "Well then, let's go have a water gun fight." She hopped off the stool, leaving the magazine where it was. I stared after her, my mouth open. I just shook my head and followed her out of the door. Alice came running down the stairs. She met us at the bottom. Her face lit up. "Water fight, water fight." She was bouncing up and down as she threw a white t-shirt at me. "What the hell is this?" I held the little tiny shirt in front of my face. "White t-shirt? It wouldn't be a water gun fight if we weren't wearing white." I glared at her. "There is no way I am having a wet t-shirt contest with you, Alice." I could see where she was going with this, and I wasn't happy. Water guns was one thing, wet t-shirts was a completely different matter. "Oh, come on, Bella, it will be fun, and we will get the boys to wear white." She wiggled her eyebrows at me. I sighed and went upstairs to change. When I walked into our room, I found Edward sitting on the couch reading a book. I quickly changed my shirt and then pulled a white t-shirt of Edward's out and threw it at him. He looked up and caught the shirt just barely before it hit his head. "Hey, what the?" He looked down at the shirt in his hand. "What is this?" "It is a white t-shirt. You're going to put it on and come have a water gun fight with us." Becky's Alice is making me, and if I have, then you have to do, unless you want Emmett to be alone with me while I have a wet see-through shirt plastered to my body. Edward growled and pounced off the couch. He quickly ripped his shirt off over his head, and I took the moment to enjoy his well-toned stomach. He slipped the white shirt over his head and grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the door. We met the rest down at the bottom of the stairs. I noticed that Alice had even gotten Jasper to agree, and he stood there in a white t-shirt. Emmett handed us all water guns and then raced outside. Sometimes I think he's 5. I sighed and followed the others out the door. The minuet we stepped outside, the water started to go in every direction. We were all soaked in seconds. I could feel my shirt stick to my body. I looked up and saw Edward staring at me through the water droplets that obscured my vision. His shirt was also plastered to his body, and there was water shimmering on every part of his body. I wanted to lick every droplet of his body. I felt my body getting warmer, and I licked my lips. His eyes locked with mine. I gave him a tiny nod and winked at him. Within a second, he was standing in front of me, passion glazing his eyes. "Why, Mr. Mason, don't you look dashing?" I purred. "Why don't you look delectable, Mrs. Mason?" He pulled me into his arms and crushed his lips to his. I could feel the fire burning between us. Then I heard Wolf whistling behind us, and I heard Alice yell us to get a room. Then I was being swung up into his arms, the kiss never being broken. He ran up the stairs with me and into our room. The minuet we were in the room. I broke away from him and pulled his shirt over his head and started to lick the water from his chest. I hopped out of his arms and kicked out of my shoes and pants, so I was just standing there in front of him in my wet t-shirt. While I had been doing this, he was out of his shoes and just stood there in his pants. I jumped at him, wrapping my legs around his waist. I felt his erection push against me, and I felt the warmth flow through me. His hands went under my shirt, and he cupped my breast. I smiled into his mouth as he kissed each nipple through my shirt, causing them to stand up against the material. The bed was only a foot away, but I refused to let him turn towards it. I reached down and unzipped his pants, sticking my hand inside. I grabbed his rigged erection in my hand. I could hear him groan, and that made me feel good. I quickly ran my hand up and down him, causing him to push himself against my hand. I helped him pull his pants off as he pushed my shirt up and around my waist, sticking his finger into my tight opening. I moaned myself. I started to moan against him as he played me slowly, then faster and faster until I couldn't take it any longer, and I exploded into a million paces. He didn't even give me time to catch my breath before he pushed me up against the wall and pushed into me hard. I let my head fall back against the wall as he rammed into me harder and harder. Faster, I moaned as I felt him pick up the speed. I felt my muscles contract around him, and then I felt like I was splintering again. Then I felt him come to his own release, and I collapsed against him. He held me tightly in his arms, and I kissed him. "I love you," he smiled and carried me over to the bed. Edward's POV. "I can't believe that was the best thing I have ever experienced. She has never been that forward before, but I could certainly get used to." I lay on the bed, playing with a stand of her hair and smiling like a fool. Bella POV. "I was flipping through the channels of the TV trying to find something to watch. Boring, boring, boring. Where was Alice when you actually wanted to go shopping?" Oh, that's right, she had locked herself in her bedroom with Jasper Shutter. Just thinking about it made me cringe. La not thinking about it. Rosalie was fixing her car again. My god, that must be the most put-together car in the world for the amount of work that girl puts into it. Emmett was jumping around playing his new Wii that Esme had bought him. I think he was playing the bowling game. I could hear him yell things at the TV in his room and had to chuckle. He was such a little kid sometimes. That's when I heard it, the most amazing music in the world. I quickly hopped off the couch and went to investigate. I followed the sound into the main hallway where I found Edward sitting at the piano. I had forgotten how great he could play. I snuck up behind him as quickly as possible. When I was right behind him, I bent down and placed a light kiss on the back of his neck. "It's amazing," I whispered. He stopped playing and turned around. I in his seat. He placed his arms around my waist and looked up into my eyes. "I wrote it for you." I could feel myself melting. "Really? But what about my other song? Will you please play my other song for me, Edward?" He looked confused for a minuet and then seemed to go into his own mind. Edward POV. Chicago 1918. I sat down at my piano and stared at the keys. What the hell was I doing? I hadn't played the piano for years, but it just seemed to be calling to me. Just then Bella's face popped into my head, and my fingers seemed to move themselves across the keys, making music come out of them. It seemed like they had a life of their own, and the music just poured out. Well, words started to form in my head. A beautiful girl sitting at my side, her eyes shining like diamonds, her laugh like bells. Her love is what holds me together. Her tears make me want to hold her. Her lips invite me to kiss her, and her hands hold mine so lovingly. A beautiful, my beautiful girl, for she is mine, forever mine. To hold, to kiss, to love. Mine, all mine, please never leave my side, my beautiful girl. The words seemed to pour out of my mind when I heard someone gasp, and I turned around to see my mother standing in the doorway. "Oh, Edward, that was amazing. You really need to share that with Bella." She came over and hugged me. I smiled up at her. "Thanks, Mom." Present day. Edward POV. I came out of the memory and smiled at Bella as I started to play her song. She sat down next to me, and as I played, I softly sang the song into her ear. Bella POV. When he started playing the song, I wanted to cry. It was still the most amazing thing that I had ever heard, even after all these years. I sat down next to him and leaned my head on his shoulder when he started to softly sing the lyrics into my ear. I went back into the past to the first time he had ever sung that song to me. Chicago 1918. Bella POV. I was in my garden when I saw Edward running towards me. "What is it, Edward? What's wrong?" I looked him worriedly, scared that something was wrong. "Nothing, Bella, come with me." He was so excited I couldn't wait to find out what it was. He grabbed my hands and pulled me across the yard and over to his house. He pulled me through the door and over to his piano. Now I was surprised because Edward hadn't played the piano in years. He sat me down on the bench and then sat down next to me and started to play the most hauntingly beautiful music in the world, but when he started to sing the lyrics to it, shivers started to go up my spine. When the song was over, I looked at him, tears on my cheeks. "I love you, Edward, the first truly do." I leaned over and gently kissed him. Present day. Bella POV. I listened as the song came to an end and leaned farther into Edward. "I love you, Edward, the first truly do." I mired what I had told him the first time I had ever heard the song. He leaned over and pressed a kiss to my lips. "I love you, Bella, I truly do." He smiled at me. Just then the doorbell rang and I jumped up to answer it. The rest of the family was standing on the stairs waiting to see who was at the door. I opened the door and stood in shock. "Jane, Felix, alack, what the hell are you doing here?" Bella POV. I couldn't believe it. "Those bastards, what the hell did they think they were doing?" I glared at the three people standing in the doorway. "Go the fuck away, Jane." The shorter girl just looked at me and laughed. "Oh, I wouldn't laugh at me, Janie," I snarled. "You know I could kill you with one movement of my finger." At this she became silent. "Now Bella boo, you wouldn't want to hurt your best friend now, would you? Stop trying to flatter me and tell me why the hell you're here, Jane. I'm sure it's not for a social call." I could feel all the Cullens' eyes on me. I saw Felix wink at me. "Okay, you ass, wink at me again, and you will find yourself on your ass." I could hear Edward growling behind me. They stood there and looked at me. I knew they wouldn't go away, so I sighed and took a step back so they could come into the house. "Now Bella, you know that Arrow wants you to join him and that you promised to come visit. He is really upset that you haven't kept your promise," Jane said in her sickly, sugary voice. "I hate Arrow and I never promised to visit him, and I will spread my own ashes across America before I ever visit that hellhole Aegean." I snapped. The house seemed to shake with my anger, and I noticed that Jane was stepping backwards with each hot word I spat at her. Now, Bells, we don't want to wreck the house, do we?" "Calm down, he just wants to know how you're doing." "How I'm doing? Like the time I went to Italy and he kidnapped me so that he could quote-unquote meet me, and then tried to keep me locked in when I refused to join his twisted world. Remember what happened to that tower? I heard they still hadn't repaired it. I could make you look so much worse." I was seeing red as I remembered that time in my life and had to fight the urge to rip Jane limb from limb. Italy 1929. Bella POV. I was visiting Volturi when I was literally kidnapped off the street and brought to a large cavernous room. I found myself surrounded by a bunch of red-eyed vampires, and I stared them down with my topaz eyes locking on their red ones. Just then an older one with white hair and papery skin came towards me. He reached out and touched me. I recoiled from his hand, but he pressed it further into my hand. He looked perplexed, like I was confusing him, and when he took his hand off of mine, he looked into my eyes. "Well, aren't you special, by dear Bella Swan?" I don't know who he had heard about me, but I was not happy and I didn't like him. He creeped me out. And why is that I challenged him. He started at me. "Well, my dear, I can't seem to get a read on your mind." Really, I acted like this was news to me, though of course I knew he couldn't read my mind back use of the shield, but still it was fun to play with him. "Jane," he snapped. I guess he wasn't happy with my tone of voice. A tiny little vampire stepped forward. "Yes, Arrow." The sweetness that dripped off her voice made me want to puke. "Try your power on her, Jane dear." He stepped back, and the little vampire took his place. She was smiling heavily as she looked at me in the eyes. I don't know what the hell she was trying to do, but nothing was happening. I thought she was going to have a brain aneurysm or start jumping up and down in a fit of rage like a 2-year-old having a tantrum. I can't, Arrow, I can't, she whined. Well, isn't this interesting? He came forward and touched my face as I recoiled. You are very special and would be a great asset to my guard here, Isabella. Why don't you join me here? You can have anything you ever dreamed of. My heart stopped then. Beccius, I knew the lie of that statement. I couldn't have Edward. I looked into their red, cold, evil eyes. When hell freezes over, will I join you and your twisted group? I want to leave when he grabbed my arm. Now listen here, I was willing to do this the easy way, but you will join me one way or another. He turned to a large man at his side. Throw her in the West Tower until she sees reason. The large man grabbed me and dragged me off, throwing me into a stone tower. I paced the tower. I couldn't believe them. I felt the anger building within me, and all of the sudden the rocks started to splinter and the tower blow apart. I stepped out into the hall looking at the pile of stones behind me. Just then, Arrow came running up to me. What the hell happened here? He demanded. Well, you see that pile of stones? That was your tower, and if you don't let me leave, that is what this whole castle will look like. I glared at him, and he took a step back. I left that day, and every so often he will check up on me, usually sending Jane to do it. I would of course always throw her out. Beccius, she was terrified of me. Present day. Bella POV. Jane, you will leave this house and never return, or you can tell your precious Arrow that I will have his ass. Do you understand me? She gulped and nodded her head as I shoved her out the door along with Felix and Alack and slammed the door in her face. Just then I heard Edward speak from behind me. Bella, what was that? I sighed. I really hated talking about my powers. Let's all go into the living room so I can explain my powers and just how much harm I can do if I want. I took Edward's hand and followed the rest of the family into the living room, dreading the conversation that was about to come. Edward POV. As I watched Bella go toe-to-toe with Jane, I realized there was something she had left out when she told me about her former life. Beccius, that tiny vampire, was positively shaking, and then Bella almost made the house come down with her anger. Hell, I was even frightened of her. And the kicker was she had the guts to threaten Arrow, and Jane took her seriously. I really need to find out what's going on here. I looked at her. Bella, what was that? She sighed. I could tell she was reluctant to tell her story, but she told us to go into the living room. She took my hand, and we followed the rest of the family, and this should be interesting, I thought. I wonder how powerful she really is. Bella POV. I sat on the couch clutching Edward's hand. I looked at all the expectant eyes upon me. I have more powers than can possibly be explained. I sighed. Sometimes I really hated having this much power. I can shield my mind, I can speak to others within my mind, and what you saw with Jane, if I get really made, I can make things and people blow up. Pretty much I have any power a vampire can have except for visions. I don't get visions. I looked at all the Cullens. Their mouths were hanging open. I could tell they were all in shock, so I projected what I had done in Italy in 1929 onto them. As I watched the images flicker through their heads, I couldn't help but be worried that they would hate me. When it ended, I looked at them. You see, I could destroy the whole vampire population if I wanted to, and that is why Arrow wants me. That's why Jane is afraid of me, and that is why I hate my powers. I really hate having that much power over others. That is the most awesome thing I have ever heard. Emmett shouted. I was surprised. That wasn't the reaction I was expecting. Usually, when I told someone that I had that much power, they would carry away from me. That is why I never told others about my powers. I looked at the rest of the family gathered in front of me, and I couldn't find anger or hurt or fear in any of their eyes. All I could see was love, acceptance, and compassion. I turned to the one pair of eyes that I had been dreading looking into. Edward looked back at me with so much compassion and love I just about could have melted into the couch cushions. I love you, Bella Marie. He cupped my face with his hands and captured my lips in a sweet feather-light kiss. I just wanted to stay there in his arms forever. I pulled away. I love you, Edward Anthony, but aren't you frightened of my powers, of what I could do if I wanted to? He pulled me farther into his embrace. I know you would never hurt anyone intentionally, and even unintentionally you would really feel bad. That is just not you, and that you have the power to protect yourself and the ones you love. For Theet, I'm happy. I could hear the others nodding their heads behind me. Edward POV. When she told us how much power she had, I was shocked, but I knew my Bella, she would never hurt anyone. I could feel my family's apprehension melt away as she explained herself, for they could also tell that though she could do damage, she wasn't a danger to them or anyone she truly loved. When she asked me, I had to tell her I had to reassure her that I wouldn't leave her, that I was staying by her side, and the rest of the family would too. When would she realize she was my family, their family? I held her close to me and just marveled at this girl how didn't realize just how perfect she was, how much she was loved and was needed. Bella POV. It was sunny out, well I guess we couldn't go to school today. I felt a pair of strong arms enfold me. No school today, babe, what should we do? I shrugged my shoulders and turned around in his embrace. I have no ideal. He smiled down at me. I might have one. He leaned down and gently kissed me. What's that? I sighed into the kiss as he pulled away. Come with me, I want to show you something. He started to pull me towards the door. When we heard loud singing coming from upstairs. ITS Sunny, OH yeah, ITS Sunny, NO school, and the same words kept being sang over and over and over again. Stop it, stop using my shoe as a microphone. That shoe cost more than your PlayStation. If you break it, I will break the Wii. All of a sudden it was silent as I tried to stifle the laughter at Rosalie's threat. I grabbed Edward's hand and hurried out the door, running across the yard and into the woods as fast as I could. As soon as I was far enough away from the house, I collapsed on the ground laughing hysterically. Oh my god, what the hell was that? That said, Edward smirking was Emmett and his happy song. Happy song, I gasped out. Ah yes, he sings it every time we don't have to go to school, and he always pisses Rose off. Last time he broke her curling iron, and she smashed his mini TV and refused to have sex with him for a week. You would think he would learn, but no, he always does it. Okay then, what did you want to show me? I worried about Edward's family sometimes. I mean seriously, a happy song. What is wrong with this guy? I love Emmett to death. He is like the big brother I never had, but he is absolutely positively crazy. Follow me. He took off at a run, and I followed close behind. Luckily, I was even faster than he was. We stopped when we got to this really pretty meadow. I breathed. It was gorgeous. This is where I come to be alone, and I wanted to share it with you, my Bella. It took me back to a time when he had said the same thing to me. Chicago 1918. Bella POV. Edward, where are we going? I panted as he pulled me behind him as he was running across a field. Yes, I said field. The crazy boy had drugged me on a bus across town and into the countryside. Now, if it was anyone but Edward the First would be completely scared, but I trust him. He stopped abruptly and I gazed at the most beautiful lush meadow I had ever seen. It's my place now, it's our place, my Bella. He whispered. Present day. Bella POV. It's like our meadow. If I could cry, I would be right now. Yes, it's like our meadow. That's what drew me to it. Becuse, it was like having a piece of you here with me. He pulled me to the ground, and we laid there watching the light bounce off each other's skin. As it was starting to get dark, we headed back to the house. When I walked in the door holding Edward's hand, I noticed a strange girl. I wondered how she was. Edward POV. I had an amazing day with Bella like back when we first meet, but when we walked in the door, I noticed the girl standing in the foyer and squeezed Bella's hand reassuringly. But at the same time, I was thinking, oh crap, Tanya. Oh, Eddie, it's been it along the strawberry blonde cood. I felt Edward's hand tighten around mine, and I wondered what in the hell was going on. Tanya, he said curtly. I would like you to meet my wife, Bella. I smiled at the girl. I wanted to try and be friendly until I got a reading of what her mind was thinking. I growled. The slut thought she could try and get Edward to sleep with her. I let go of Edward's hand and stepped in front of him. Dream on, honey. I could feel the floor rumbling under me. Oh crap, my temper. I had to get myself under control. She looked shocked until she realized that I could read her mind. Yeah, and who is going to stop me? Me, I said simply. She laughed. You, and what army I could take you. Edward volleyed. Between the two of us, I knew had read Tanya's mind, but he was trying to keep up with our back and forth conversation. She walked up to Edward and grabbed him, forcing her lips onto his. I knew he didn't move. Becuse, he was still in shock from when he read her mind. Oh, that was it. The bitch was going down. I grabbed her by the hair and tossed her against the wall. Keep your fucking hands off of my husband, you hoary slut. I spat out. Maybe you should leave, Tanya. I whipped my head around and found Carlisle standing there in the doorway. She looked furiously at me and then stormed out of the door. I looked at the wall where I had left a dent. Sorry, Carlisle, tell Esme I'll pay to have the wall fixed. Oh, don't worry, Bella, there is no need. We can fix it up quick. I'm just sorry about Tanya. I'm so disappointed in. I looked over at Edward. I'm sorry, Bella. I was in shock. I should have tried and stop her. Oh, Edward, don't worry. I walked up to him and wrapped my arms around him. I know you love me, and you will forever. He swept me into his arms and carried me up the stairs. Edward POV. I couldn't believe Tanya, she was such a slut. I carried Bella upstairs to our room and laid her down on the bed, climbing over top of her and trailing kisses down her neck. I worshipped her body that night the way I had never before, for she was my Bella, my sweet precious Bella. She was worth more than 1,000 Tanyas. There were many Tanyas in the world, but only one Bella. Tanya POV. I can't believe that Edward is married. It's so not fair. I will get him. I will kill the bitch. God, I can't believe I started hunting animals for him. Well, if he can choose someone else, I can choose human blood. I quickly hunted a lone man in the forest hunting and sucked him clean. I felt full for the first time in years. I felt my eyes turn red, and I started to plot the downfall of Bella Cullen Beckus. Nothing got in the way of something that I wanted, and I wanted Edward. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Bye. The end.